Hi everyone, and welcome to this presentation on active reading. Thanks for joining us. So to get started, we're going to discuss some of the objectives of this presentation and what you'll be taking away. So hopefully by the end of this presentation, you will have a working definition and understanding of what active reading is. You'll understand the challenges that you'll be facing in college that require active reading and why you need active reading now more than ever. You'll also understand the difference between active and passive reading, and most importantly, you'll be able to learn a few new active reading techniques that should be helpful to you in your university career. So, what is active reading? Active reading involves critically engaging a text with the purpose of understanding and retaining the knowledge presented in the text, synthesizing that information with what you already know, and discovering main ideas presented in the text. So basically, active reading is the most important part is that critically engaging aspect, right? So what you really want to take away from this is that you need to be focused on the text. And so as opposed to maybe what some of us did in high school, where we just sort of, read what the teacher assigned or just sort of skimmed over whatever we needed. Active reading really is reading with intent, right? And so what is also important about it is that it's a skill, right? So it's something that you can learn and something that you need to practice and something that you will get better at as time goes on. And so what active reading involves is a series of techniques that you can employ in different instances that will help you to retain the information that you're reading better and make you more efficient at reading. So now we're going to talk about why active reading is so important in college. So I'm sure you can think of a few reasons, but one of the main ones is that the difficulty and volume of written information that you're presented with is going to be greater than ever before that you've dealt with, right? So you're going to be getting more readings out of class, more readings to do in textbooks, more books to read, just in general. Even your written assignments from your instructors. If you get a assignment for a paper, for example, it could be potentially 2 to 3 pages long, or an example for a paper that your teacher gives you could be significantly long, or if you're in a science course, sorry, and you're working on a particular lab or something that might involve written instructions that can be a few pages long, and so you want to be able to look at that information and retain what's necessary and not have to keep going back and back and back to it to check the information every time you want to look at it. So also along with that, a lot of the information is going to be presented to you in a written format, and so back in high school, maybe if you had a test coming up or something, or if you had a quiz and you looked at the quiz and something that was on the quiz had never actually been discussed in class, you could maybe complain to your teacher and say, hey, we never saw this before, and your teacher might let you off. But now that's not a luxury that you have as a college student, right? So if your teacher assigns a reading, a lot of the time that's fair game for assignments, for tests and things like that. And so you really do want to be making sure that you're receiving all of the information that your professor is giving to you, regardless of the format. And if it is in a written format, that you are, digesting that information and retaining it. And lastly, you want the skill in college for sure, but also well beyond, right? So, there's plenty of different instances when you need to adult that you will want to have develop the skill so that you can retain this information, so that you can read something once and clearly understand what is being asked of you. So it's something important in the workforce when you're working on your finances or anything like that. So yeah, the skill is definitely going to be important well beyond your time in college. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the benefits that you get from employing active reading. And so Ideally, if you are honest about employing active reading and take it seriously, you can expect to retain more of the information that's presented to you. You can perform better on your tests and homework that are related to readings, obviously. You'll be able to read more efficiently, and so you won't spend time rereading and rereading and rereading the same thing that you've forgotten or weren't paying attention the first 2 times you read it. You can engage more critically with the materials presented to you, so you'll be able to have a better idea of what's being discussed, and so hopefully you'll have a more thorough understanding of the material. And also, active reading is really helpful in letting you know where your knowledge is, lacking. So, it lets you, gives you an idea of what you need to look for and what you need to learn, right? And so that's pretty helpful when you're trying to study for a test or anything of that nature. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between active reading and passive reading. And so active reading is what we'll be discussing in this presentation, and passive reading is more along the lines of maybe what some of us did earlier on when we were giving reading assignments. And so active reading is critically engaging with the text with the intent to retain the information, where passive reading is simply reading the words on the page without any additional thought behind it, right? So there's no goal in mind when you're reading the words. Active reading is a skill that can be practiced. It's something that you can work on. There are techniques and tools that you can use, whereas passive reading is just your sort of ability to read, right? So it's not anything that you you can practice maybe the words per minute that you read, but it's not a retention metric. Lastly, as we said, active reading requires the techniques that you use before, during, and after reading the text, and passive reading is just reading without the implementation of any of those techniques. So now we're going to jump into the reading strategies that we have. And that's going to be the rest of this presentation, as all of these different reading strategies that you guys can use before, during, and after a reading assignment. So the first thing that you want to do before you read is prepare your environment. So, this is pretty straightforward, but you just want to make sure that you're in a well-lit environment that's conducive to focused study. And obviously the most important thing about preparing your environment is eliminating distractions. And so, you need to be honest with yourself about what your distractions are. If you get distracted by other people, then probably, your lone dorm room or a study room in the library might be a good fit. Or likewise, if you're like me and you're tempted by, your TV or your computer or whatever the case may be, you might want to leave all that stuff behind in your, apartment or your dorm, and just head to the library or head to another building where you're not going to be tempted by any of that. Put your phone on airplane mode or whatever. This is what I had to do when I was in college and needed to get my readings done. I, would just bring my book with me to a silent corner of the student union, and I wouldn't have anything else with me. Or likewise, when I was on my computer, I'd make sure that I would, turn my Wi-Fi off so I wouldn't be able to go on the internet and get distracted. So a more specific technique that you can use for active reading is to ask yourself pre-reading questions. And so pre-reading questions are questions you make for yourself, but they're designed to give purpose and context to the reading. And so probably if I give you the examples, that'll probably make more sense about what we're looking for. So some good pre-reading question ideas are, what do I think the main idea of this reading will be? What do I already know about this topic? How does this information relate to what we've been covering recently in class? Why is the professor assigned this reading? Will this reading be covered on a quiz or relate to a paper or anything like that? And so by answering these questions for yourself and continuing to think about them as you read, you'll be able to synthesize the information presented to you. And by synthesize, I mean you'll be able to connect that information to what you've already been learning. And so, if you're already thinking about, well, what have we been covering in class? So, on Monday we talked about the Civil War, and maybe this reading is talking about the Reconstruction era or something along those lines, right? But just so that you're constantly thinking about where your class has been, what you're talking about now, and where it might be going. and this will help you, more critically engage with the information that you're being presented with. So next, and this is the biggest section, we're going to talk about the active reading strategies while you're reading, right? That makes sense. So the first one, and this is really important, is to write comments while you are reading. And so a lot of people say, read with a pencil, or, just have your pencil ready whenever you're out reading. Because adding these contexts or these comments into the margins of your readings will really help flesh out your understanding. And there's not really any rules about what you need to write. The more you can focus on what the main ideas being presented are, or information that's new to you, that's good. But if you just want to write comments like, oh, this is crazy, this is like, I've never heard anything like this before, or this makes me really angry, or whatever the case is, as long as you're interacting with the text, that's really what's important, and doing so in a meaningful way, right? So if you just put a bunch of like smiley faces by everything, that doesn't really help you out. But if you are trying to connect information throughout the paper, or if you're saying like, oh, this sounds really important, maybe I could write a paper about this section, or whatever this is talking about, or this really sounds like the main idea of the paper or article, that's really going to benefit you. And it makes those connections in your brain right away when you're interpreting the information in that manner. And so one other thing to note is that you want to avoid what I call the highlighter trap. And so a lot of people, you'll notice, will highlight as they're reading, and highlighting is fine. What you want to avoid is just highlighting everything, or highlighting sort of indiscriminately, right? So if I were reading a article and I highlighted all the important information, and I ended up highlighting half of the article, that doesn't really benefit me when I go back to look at it, and it doesn't really benefit me in the moment either, because as far as my brain's concerned, there's no difference between the information that I highlighted and what I didn't really, right? So, and when you go back to read it, you're just reading half of the article instead of the whole, instead of just like specific comments. And so what you really want to do is make these comments that have meaning, right? And so what some people will do is they'll highlight with multiple colors, and so that can be effective, but generally speaking, if you want to maximize the benefit that you're getting from reading and making these comments, then you're going to want to write information that's specific to you. So another great thing that you can do as you're reading is to make predictions. And so as you're reading the text, one way to ensure that you're engaged is to keep trying to predict what's going to be discussed next. And so this can be a little different from topic to topic, right? So if it's something scientific, or maybe it's talking about like a math equation or something along those lines, maybe it'd be a good idea to try to predict so we've discussed, A, B, and C of the process. What is, D, E, and F going to, what are they going to discuss, right? Or if the source is more literary, if you're reading a novel, say, for instance, for a lit class, or if you're, reading something that is more of a historic timeline or things like that, then you can, use the understanding of the text, use what you've commented on so far, what have the main ideas been, how is the text being written, to sort of try to predict where it's going. And so by making these predictions, you're critically analyzing the information you've already seen, and you're applying it based on the framework that the text is giving you to try to predict what's happening. And so what this really is doing is giving you tools to critically think about the work in front of you. So one of the most important aspects of active reading and reading in general, is being able to determine the main idea. And so as you're reading, identifying the thesis or the main argument in a scholarly journal is critical, and it can be hard. So usually as you're going along, the main idea for individual paragraphs of a reading are going to be a more specific answer. So, it answers the who, what, where, or why of a certain, I shouldn't say why. So another tool that you can use while you're reading is to look for signposts. And so signposts are phrases or terms within the text that help you identify critical information. And they help you identify also when the reading is shifting or if the information is taking a turn. And so some of these phrases, are look like, most importantly, yada yada yada, or in contrast, blankety blankety blank. And so what they do is they assist the reader in identifying when the reading is shifting direction or when the critical information is about to be presented. And so when you watch for these signposts, it helps you keep from getting lost, actually. And so if you were to be just passively reading a text or skimming it and you weren't paying close attention to these signposts, you might think that the author is making has like totally changed their argument when really they're just providing a counterexample or something along those lines. So another technique that you can use while you're actively reading is to draw outlines and diagrams. And so these are visual representations of the information that help you break down what's been presented to you. And so these outlines and diagrams also force you to know the main and supporting ideas of the reading, and so that's really key because it's forcing you to put down onto the paper these ideas that have only been presented in text, right? And so, say you're reading something about mitosis, right? And so, well, what's the main idea of the article is discussing mitosis, and then maybe the branches of your diagram would be the different stages of mitosis or something along those lines. And so you can use any type of diagram that you are comfortable with, and obviously some will make more sense for certain sources than others. So a Venn diagram might be useful when you're doing a compare and contrast, whereas mind map would be useful, say, for the mitosis example. A timeline would be useful for some historical event, and a process outline would be helpful if you're trying to identify certain stages of development or stages of an equation or something like that. And so it's also important that you're the only one who is going to see your outline. I'm not the most beautiful handwriter or drawer, so I certainly don't hang them up on my refrigerator, but they're important tools, and as long as they make sense to you and you're being honest about the information that you're providing and what you know and what you don't, then it's going to benefit you. And so the last technique to use while you're reading is to reread with purpose. And so the important aspect of this is that I added the with purpose section there, and that really means that each time you're rereading the text, you're doing so for a different reason. Whereas in the past, if you were just rereading something, maybe you just sort of reread it and reread it and reread it and reread it until you thought that you had identified all the information, but you didn't have a certain goal in mind each time you were reading. And so you're not really absorbing any new information doing it that way. Maybe you might catch one or two new things each time, but you're just sort of slamming your brain with the same wall of text every time and hoping that something sticks. And so what you want to do when you're reading with purpose is to have a different goal in mind each time, right? And so the first time you just want to maybe skim for the overall idea and any new information, or information that's new to you, I should say. The second time you want to look for main ideas and solidify that new information. And the last time that you read the text, you want to read in a focused way and take notes, comment in the margins on everything that seems important, the main ideas, the supporting ideas, things of that nature. So lastly, we're just going to talk about the strategies that you can use after you finished reading. And so the first one of those is to write a summary and outline. And so this is a good idea, and it has a lot of benefits too. So down the line, you might not remember everything that was in the text, and your outline means that you won't have to read the whole thing over again. Like, say, if you're writing a final paper that is cumulative or discusses something that you learned back in the middle of the semester, your outline, is a good sort of abstract for the reading that will give you the highlights of what was in it. It also forces you to look at all the information and analyze its importance in relation to the rest. So, if as you were reading you thought that some topic was super important, but now after you're done and you're sort of compiling all of that information, you realize, well, okay, maybe this wasn't as important as I thought it was. And so this sort of gives you a frame of reference for everything that's in the text. And it also helps you learn the new information, right? So writing it down, rewriting it, really helps solidify it in your mind. And so the most important thing with the summary is that it's in your own words, right? So if you're just copying, verbatim what was written in the text, or if you're just copy and pasting what important sentences, that's not really helping yourself out, right? It's the act of putting it in your own information or in your own words that really helps you memorize it. So the next technique is to answer questions, and so this can be done with the questions that you ask yourself before you began reading. And they can be a little bit more specific now that you're done with the reading, right? So you'll know why is this reading important? Why did the professor assign this? And in some of this there might not be a single best answer. You might just think, well, he assigned this because XYZ. We're talking about this in class, and so those might be some of the answers to that. And obviously you want to know what the main argument presented in the reading is now. And also if the text itself, if you're reading a textbook or something like that has questions at the end that test your comprehension of the information, then those are good to answer. And so and the best ones to answer are the ones that make you critically think more. Those aren't the ones that just ask when did so and so cross the Delaware, or what is the process of blank. That you just go to the page and read the line, and that gives you the answer. The questions that are more valuable to you are the ones that are asking you, don't actually have an answer within the text. They're just sort of asking you to think about the information you've been given and provide an answer. So the last and most beneficial technique that you can use after you read is to try to teach the information to someone else. And if you don't have anyone else, I know people try to teach their dogs. Some people will teach the wall. They'll teach anything. Essentially, it's just verbalizing the information that you've learned and while you've been reading, right? And so there have been plenty of studies that show that when you try to teach someone, that's the most information that you retain from the new information that's been provided to you. And so what's really helpful is that it helps move the information from short-term to long-term. And what it also does that's very beneficial is it shows what you know well, because you'll be able to talk about that for a long time. And it also, even more importantly, shows you what you don't know and what you still need to work on. And that is the information that, if you're trying to teach this to somebody, you'll kind of stumble over, and you actually won't really know an answer if they ask you a question, and that's what you need to go back to. And so this is really helpful in finding those knowledge gaps and helping you know what you know and learn what you don't know. So now we're just going to sort of summarize everything that we've been talking about today. So one really handy technique that's pretty simple is a acronym that helps you remember sort of some steps that you want to take while you're doing active reading, right? And it's called SQ3R. I don't know if there's any other way to pronounce that, but what it stands for is survey, question, read, recite, review. And so when you start, you're surveying, you skim the reading, looking for general framework, and also looking for the section headings and diagrams, and then you question, and those are the pre-reading questions about the content of the reading, why you were assigned it, what it could be about. Next is read, and so you read actively and answer the questions that were raised by Q. Then you recite, and so that means retrieving the information that you just learned by reciting it out loud or writing it down in your own words. And then review is when you summarize the entirety of the reading in your own words. And so this is a good just little guide to sort of go by to think about the steps that you want to take while you're active reading. So this is the last little bit of information, and probably the most important. So the big takeaway from all of this, I guess, the key component to this active reading is that it's active, right? So you need the idea is that you're engaging with whatever you're reading. And so usually, a hang up that people have with their reading is their mindset. They think it's not interesting to them. They don't think they need it. They don't think it relates to their lives or whatever it may be. But you really need to make the reading important to you, and interesting to you. So if you, you know, need to just think about it pragmatically, if that's as much as you can get out of it, right? So I need to read this paper, read this article so that I can do well on my test, so that I can get a good grade and get a good job, along those lines. It'll be more beneficial if you can, find it interesting, like learn things from it, get interested in the topic at hand. But, any way to sort of not look at the reading as a chore and, be self-interested in it, will help you become more engaged with it. And also this needs to be practiced, right? This isn't something that you will immediately, be good at right away. It is sort of a learning curve to employ a lot of these techniques and to make them become a habit. And so that's, really important in the active reading. And lastly, and this is probably should have been at the beginning of the presentation, but I think a lot of students, and this was me when I was a student too, we need to be honest with ourselves about how much work we're actually putting into our readings, right? And so I know a lot of the time it does seem sort of overwhelming, the amount of readings that you're given, but we're given them for a reason, right? And if you are just skimming over everything you're given, and you aren't doing well in the class, obviously there might be a reason for that, right? And so just opening a book and having it next to you while you're talking with your friends or whatever, that's not reading, right? Just skimming through a page or two, or reading 35 pages 15 minutes before class, that's not active reading, right? And so one of the most important things is just to make sure that you are being honest about that, are really putting the work into it. And if you do, you will see the results. It's just like working out or training at anything. It takes the practice, it takes the work, but then you will see the improvement once you put that time in. All right, so if you guys have any questions about this, you can stop by and see me. I work in the cave from 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. My name's Eric Bryan. Yeah, thanks for joining me.